So initially, the clip you're about to see was going to be part of a different video, and then I decided that video was too long and there was no reason to include my November wrap up in that video, and it would actually make more sense for me to just do like a winter wrap up. So if my November wrap up sounds like it should be part of another video, it's because it originally was, and I'm just going to clip it as best as I can to put it in here. So here is that clip. Okay, the first book I finished was The Watchmaker of Filigree Street by Natasha Pulley. This was one that George picked up for me on a whim. I think I asked him for like a surprise when he went out to town or something, and he came back with this and actually did the research into checking it was like had good reviews and people actually liked it. And I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this. It was nearly a 5-star, like it was nearly perfect. This is about a watchmaker on Filigree Street. We follow Thaniel, whose flat is broken into. We're like pre-World War, but I couldn't tell you which one. And he works for the Telegraph office. And instead of people taking anything when they break into his house, a really pretty watch is left behind and his dishes are done, of all things. And this leads him into a mystery that will lead him to the watchmaker. It will lead him to the watchmaker's history and involve him with the rebels and some political difficulties that Japan is having. There is a lot of really uncomfortable language around the Japanese people that are living in London, but as far as I'm aware, it is all relevant to the time. It is also relevant to the plot, which is sufficiently like the pace doesn't really drop with this plot. We follow a couple of different people. We follow Thaniel, we follow Maury the watchmaker, and we also follow, oh, I've forgotten her name, Charlotte, who is a scientist at, I want to say Cambridge, it's either Cambridge or Oxford, and all of them become embroiled in each other's lives, and it's just a really unexpected story, and I've not read anything quite like it in a really long time, so would heartily recommend if any of that sounded up your street. The next book I read was Under the Earth Over the Sky by Emily McCosh. This was a 5-star. No, this was a 4.5. It was nearly a 5-star. Also really surprising. I wrote a review of this for the Fantasy Hive if you want to go read that long form review instead of me just talking at you, because honestly I put more thought into the long form ones than I do when I just sort of verbally vomit at you. This was really interesting to me because it was a fae story that didn't focus on romance. It focused on familial ties, specifically that between our protagonist Iomar and the human baby that he finds in the woods, that he keeps a secret and raises as his own. There is an outside plot, but it feels like Iomar and his kid and his little like closest entourage are in like a bubble that is protected from the outside dangers and plot that is also going on in the background, if that makes sense. It is such lyrical, beautiful language, so if you like that kind of language, I hugely recommend this. I don't normally enjoy it, but I found it really powerful and really efficient at describing the setting we were in and making you feel like you were there, that you were being affected in the same ways that everyone else was being affected by the things happening in this enchanted forest. I just really loved it. There is romance in there, but it's not a romance plotline. It is just romance that exists between two of the characters. It is very matter of fact. There is no smut, and it was such a refreshing take on fae. Like, I absolutely love the dangerous fae thing. I don't love the romanticy fae thing, but this was different and I really enjoyed it. Then I reread Nettle and Bone for a different vlog, so I'm not going to talk about that here, but I did read it. Then I read my mum's book, The Shetland Witch. I finally got around to reading it, and it was a really pleasant surprise. It is a really odd sensation or feeling to read a book that's been written by someone that you know really well, because I could see so many aspects of my mum in all of the different choices that she made in this book. There was Shetland, Scotland, birds, archaeology, the Greek gods, the witchiness, the walking, the food that she picked, the shops that she chose to mention, like the settings that she chose to go to, the way that they discovered information. All of that rang so heavily of my mum, and that was really like, it's such a unique experience. I've not really had that before in a book for obvious reasons. I would heartily recommend. It almost feels like two stories in one, because there's a part one and a part two that feel very separated from each other, but both stories are really good, and I would definitely recommend this book if you like the idea of a group of older protagonists who are all witches protecting Shetland, which is a tiny island, the top of Scotland, from the Greek gods that have landed on their doorstep. And we're back to the books that you've seen me read. So that was it. That's my little baby November wrap up. I did DNF a whole load of books this month as well, but if you want to see those are Patreon only vlogs now. The link is in the description below, and I will see you over there if that's what you choose to do. Enjoy the rest of the vlog. Now, as for what I read in December, these are all the books I read in December that weren't for other videos, which it's going to take me a minute to unpick what was what. So the first book I read in December that wasn't for any other video was Rat Queens Volume 1, Sass and Sorcery by Curtis J. Weed. This popped up on Everand as like a random one. There are 4 volumes. I'm waiting for the second one to become available, but I don't think it's available until like midway through January. But number 3 and number 4 are currently. So I really struggle understanding how Everand does their like what becomes available when, because the first one was fine and then they said everything was going to be available at Christmas and now the second one's not available till January. Does it depend on like how many people listen to it? I'm just curious. I really enjoyed it though. This is a graphic novel series about a band of mercenaries called the Rat Girls. There are 4 of them. They just get up to some shenanigans. For some reason, people are trying to kill them and some of the other mercenary groups that are hanging around town. And it's kind of an introduction to all these characters and setting up for some of the other novels. It is a little bit queer. It's a little bit... It's a romp. It's gory. If you don't like gore in graphic novels, don't read this. But it's funny. It's very D&D vibes. It's that brand of fantasy. And I just really enjoyed it. We'll be carrying on with this series in 2025, I think. Then I read What Doesn't Break by Cassandra Core. This is a Critical Role book, one of the Bells Hells one. It's about Lordna. For those who don't know, Critical Role is a D&D series that is streamed and then uploaded to YouTube afterwards. They are very, very big. They are very, very popular in the D&D scene. Matt Mercer, who is the DM, is a genius and he crafts these wonderful sprawling worlds that his gang of friends create characters in and play through. Critical Role have become this kind of Goliath figure in D&D, in that setting, in that world. They have an Amazon TV show, Vox Machina, that was from their first campaign. They are now on campaign 3. I watched all the way up until like episode 30 of campaign 3 and then I lost interest, but I did really like Lordna, and Lordna is from campaign 3. She is Marisha Ray's character and she is this like undead, slightly kooky, slightly spooky character, so it's no wonder I loved her. I didn't realise they were doing a book about her backstory before the campaign until I saw it in Waterstones, so I picked it up. And doubly interesting, it's written by Cassandra Core, who's a horror writer, so if you're going to get any like well-known novelist to write a Critical Role book about a spooky kooky lady, it's going to be Cassandra Core. I have not read anything by Cassandra Core yet, but I do have When the Salt Grows Heavy. The Salt Grows Heavy by her on my TBR. It's right there. I'm going to read it. I think it's going to be my January read. But like that combination of Lordna and Cassandra Core and Critical Role, picked it up, loved it. It was a 4-star for me. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was the right amount of spooky, the right amount of kooky, the right amount of infuriating. You can absolutely read it without any knowledge of Critical Role, so please do feel free to pick this up. To me, it wouldn't make any sense if they wrote these books and sold them in shops. If you did need to have prior knowledge of what was going on, it is a great story within itself. It's definitely horror, deals a lot with like the undead and finding yourself and becoming the person you want to be and unpicking your backstory. It is tragic, trigger warnings for some nasty gory stuff and some upsetting stuff as well. And I was just really pleasantly surprised. And like, I don't know if I'd necessarily pick up any other books because I don't know that there's necessarily any other characters I'd want to read the backstory of from Critical Role. Maybe Caduceus from the second season, because he was lovely. But yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised. Would recommend, even if you don't like D&D. I read Black Tudors by Miranda Kaufman. This has been on my TBR for forever. This is a history about Black Tudors and Black people in that era of the UK, and there is a chapter per person, and Miranda Kaufman goes into like the context around their lives and what they did and who they worked for and why they were in the UK and how they were treated and what records we have that give that proof that they existed in the UK and had lives and did their own thing. I was pleasantly surprised to learn about a number of them near Bristol. Westbury-on-Trim and Almondsbury, if you know the area, were mentioned a couple of times. So it was nice to hear about some of these people that lived in those times that they were local. I have very little knowledge around UK history at that time. When I was taught history in Brussels. I did a brief amount of history in the UK when I did 2 years of school over here, but the rest of my schooling was in Brussels. So we learnt about Charlemagne and Alexander the Great and like European history. And by the time I left Brussels, we hadn't quite gotten to that chronological point where slavery was happening. Like that was never one of the topics I was taught about. I obviously know that Bristol is like one of the major trading ports, had a lot to do with slavery, but it was really, I can't think of a better word other than interesting to hear about the black people that lived in the UK and in Bristol around this time, because they weren't all slaves. Some of them were servants, but that was a perfectly respectable job at the time. And the period that Miranda Kaufman covers, the British law courts were very stern about the fact that like if you bought slaves and you brought them to the UK, they were no longer slaves anymore. Like there was, I can't remember what the phrase was, it was repeated a couple of times, that basically slaves weren't a thing in the UK legally at that point. They would then go on to take part in the slave trade and do horrible things, but at that point slavery was not okay. It was not a thing that the UK did at that time, which I didn't know. I had this idea that once slavery kind of was a thing, everyone was like, well, yeah, that's a great idea. We're just going to do that and be horrible people for a couple of centuries or however long it went on. Again, I don't know enough about this topic. I would absolutely read more by Miranda Kaufman. I would absolutely read more on this topic. Audiobook is the way to go. I really enjoyed the audiobook. But yeah, I would love to learn more about it. I think I might see if I can find a book on this kind of topic, but more Bristol centred, because after, like, I was around in Bristol when the Colston statue was brought down, and I'd like to know a bit more about what the history and the context around that was. Obviously Colston Hall is no longer the Colston Hall. One of the schools had to change their names because they were named after Colston, who I believe was a slave trader, if you're not familiar with what happened. It's a gap in my knowledge that I would like to read more, to learn more about and to fill. If you have any recommendations for that kind of book, please let me know. I haven't looked into it just yet, but I was really impressed with this book. I can't remember when this video is going out, but I hope you have a great start to your 2025. I'm sure I will see you soon, because I have many plans for this channel next year. And I will see you soon. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Hit the bell if you want to be notified every time I post. My Patreon is linked down below if you would like to support me. Thank you very much for being here, and I will see you in the next video.